ഞാൻ ഈ സ്ക്രീൻ എടുത്തിട്ടേക്കട്ടെ, എന്നിട്ട് ഷെയർ വല്ലതും ഞെക്കണോ? ഒന്നും ചെയ്യണ്ടല്ലോ. എന്തോ എനിക്കൊന്നും കേൾക്കത്തില്ല. ഹലോ ഹലോ, ക്യാൻ യു ഹിയർ മീ? യെസ്, താങ്ക് യു. Esther? Esther? Hello. Good morning. Hope you have enjoyed your holidays and have completed the work that was given to you by now. Today, we are going to deal with Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom. This is an extract from Nelson Mandela's autobiography. The word Long Walk in the title refers to the long journey Nelson Mandela undertook along with other African leaders to liberate Africa from the clutches of apartheid. The lesson as such can be divided into 3 parts. The first section, Nelson Mandela describes the inaugural ceremony when he was appointed as South Africa's first black president. In the second section, Nelson Mandela pays tribute to the great African patriots who were instrumental in bringing about the political freedom in Africa. The third and the last section, we get to know the reason why Nelson Mandela joined the African National Congress and began his fight against apartheid. Now, what's apartheid? Apartheid is a political system that separates people according to their race. It all started when the white-skinned people of Africa erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned people of their own land. This system formed the basis of one of the harshest and most inhumane societies the world has ever known. Under apartheid, the non-whites were forced to live in areas away from the whites and were forced to use separate public facilities. Now, let us watch a video based on apartheid. Hope you now have an idea about what apartheid is. And now getting back to text. Under before you read, you have the names of 3 countries here: North America, South Africa, and Australia. You are asked to pick out the country in which apartheid existed until recently. You know, in all the 3 countries, the apartheid existed, but in North America, it existed only till 1968. And in Australia, it ended in 1966. But in the case of South Africa, it lasted till 1994, until Mandela became the first African president. And now you get a brief description about Nelson Mandela. Mandela and his African National Congress spent a lifetime fighting against apartheid. Mandela had to spend 30 years in prison. Finally, democratic elections were held in South Africa in 1994, and Mandela became the first black president of a new nation. Now, the next task given under before you read is you are given a news item from the BBC that was broadcast on 10th May 1994. And your task is to identify what Mandela meant by this term, historic occasion, the inauguration, in his autobiography. Now, let us go through the news item. Mandela becomes South Africa's first black president. Nelson Mandela has become South Africa's first black president after more than 3 centuries of white rule. Mr. Mandela's African National Congress, ANC party, won 252 of the 400 seats in the first democratic elections of South Africa's history. The inauguration ceremony took place in the Union Buildings Amphitheatre in Pretoria today, attended by politicians, dignitaries from more than 140 countries around the world. Never, never again will this beautiful land experience the oppression of one by another, said Nelson Mandela in his address. Jubilant scenes on the streets of Pretoria followed the ceremony with blacks, whites, and coloreds celebrating together. More than 1 lakh South African men, women, and children of all races sang and danced with joy. So it's obvious from the news item that what Mandela intended was the inaugural ceremony where he was appointed as the first black president of Africa. Now, you have yet another task. Here you have got some expressions from the lesson. It's there in column A, and you get its meaning in column B. I want you to choose the right option from column B, and you have to do this as an assignment. You need to complete the assignment only when I finish the discussion of the lesson. So that's the first assignment for this lesson. Now, let us see what the text says. The first paragraph gives you a description about that particular day when the inauguration took place. 10th May dawned bright and clear. For the past few days, I had been pleasantly besieged by dignitaries and world leaders who were coming to pay their respects before the inauguration. The inauguration would be the largest gathering ever of international leaders on South African soil. So Mandela remembers that it was a bright and sunny day, and he remembers for the past few days he was surrounded, besieged means surrounded by dignitaries and world leaders from different parts of the world. They have come there to pay their respects before the inaugural ceremony. And he says that this is the first time that Africa is witnessing such a large gathering of international leaders. And the next ceremony tells you about the location where the inauguration took place. The ceremonies took place in the lovely sandstone amphitheater formed by the Union buildings in Pretoria. For decades, this had been the seat of white supremacy, and now it was the site of a rainbow gathering of different colors and nations for the installation of South Africa's first democratic non-racial government. So the ceremonies actually took place in the amphitheater. You can see the image of an amphitheater here. This is an amphitheater. It's an open-air theater with a stage at the center, and the seats are arranged like this, as if in a gallery in a stadium. So this is an amphitheater. And you can see the Union building mentioned in the lesson. The amphitheater was in this Union building. Now, so the ceremonies took place in the amphitheater. And he says that for decades, decade is a period of 10 years. For years, this amphitheater was under the supremacy of the whites. And this is for the first time it is open to all kinds of people. So he beautifully presents this by the expression, the sight of rainbow gathering. Just as in a rainbow, the colors come together, we can see in this building, people from different parts of the world came together to attend this inaugural ceremony. Now to the next paragraph. On that lovely autumn day, I was accompanied by my daughter Senani. On the podium, Mr. De Klerk was sworn in as second deputy president. Then Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as first deputy president. When it was my turn, I pledged to obey and uphold the Constitution and to devote myself to the well-being of the Republic and its people. So he went to the inaugural ceremony along with his daughter Senani, and Mr. De Klerk was sworn in first as the second deputy president, and then came Thabo Mbeki as the first deputy president. And finally, when the turn of Mandela came, he pledged to uphold and obey the Constitution and to devote himself for the welfare of the Republic. Here you can see Zenani along with Nelson Mandela. This is Mr. De Klerk, who was sworn in as the second deputy president. He's seen along with Nelson Mandela. And this is Mr. Thabo Mbeki, looks almost like Nelson Mandela himself. And he was sworn in as the first deputy president. Now back to the text. Now, to the assembled guests and the watching world, I said. Now we get more about Mandela's speech. Today, all of us do by our presence here confer glory and hope to newborn liberty. Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. So, it is with great expectations and hope that all the African people had gathered there to witness the inaugural ceremony. And over the years, they had been experiencing an extraordinary human disaster. An extraordinary, since it is not to be seen everywhere. This is typical of Africa alone. And human disaster. Disaster, you have heard of natural disasters where everything would be destroyed. So here it refers to the apartheid system, which is considered as a disaster as far as human beings in Africa were concerned. And this disaster had lasted too long. Okay. Hello, Alka. I just want to confirm that whether I am audible or not. Yes. Okay, thank you. Above? Is it audible for you? Yeah, okay, thank you. So we'll resume our talk. And so, Africa had experienced this system of apartheid for such a long time. And since they had been suffered and tortured like anything, they had a huge amount of experience. And Mandela hopes that it would be enough for them for bringing out a society which would be a matter of pride for the entire humanity. We who were outlaws not so long ago have today been given the rare privilege to be host to nations of the world on our own soil. We thank all of our distinguished international guests for having come to take possession with people of our country of what is, after all, a common victory for justice, for peace, for human dignity. So Africans were considered as outlaw. Outlaw is a person who has broken a law and who is a fugitive, a captive. And so they were considered as captives and outlaws. And today, these outlaws are given a rare privilege. What is that rare privilege? To be host to all these international leaders who had gathered from different parts of the world. We thank all our distinguished guests for having come to take possession with the people of our country of what is, after all, a common victory for justice, for peace, for human dignity. Next, he thanks all the international leaders for having come there just to take part in the celebration of Africa, which can be termed as a common victory for justice, for peace, and human dignity. We have at last achieved our political emancipation. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. Now, Mandela says that their efforts have borne fruits, their long struggle had borne fruits. And so they pledge once again to liberate themselves from all sorts of bondage in the form of poverty, deprivation, suffering, and any kind of discrimination. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. He promises that never again African people will be oppressed by anyone. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. And the sun is shining bright, freedom is reigning high, and that sun will never set on such a glorious achievement like the political freedom that Africa was enjoying at the time. Let freedom reign. God bless Africa. And with that, the speech of the president ends. Now, a few moments later, we all lifted our eyes in awe as a spectacular array of South African jets, helicopters, and troop carriers rode in perfect formation over the Union buildings. So, a few minutes later, they all were amazed to see the spectacular display of these aircrafts, which included the South African jets, helicopters, and troop carriers. These are nothing but aircrafts that were used to shift the military people from one place to another. So all these aircrafts rode in perfect formation over the Union buildings. You can imagine the loud sound that there might be when all these aircrafts move together. It was not only a display of pinpoint precision and military force, but a demonstration of the military's loyalty to democracy, to a new government that had been freely and fairly elected. So this was not only a display of pinpoint precision. You know, one move in the wrong direction can result in a disaster. So that was a display of pinpoint precision and, of course, a display of the military force. But not only that, this was a demonstration of military's loyalty towards a newly formed government. Only moments before, the highest generals of the South African Defence Force and the police, their chests bedecked with ribbons and medals from days gone by, saluted me and pledged their loyalty. So a few minutes back, the South African generals and the police, they were in their official uniform, and hence their chests were decorated with all the ribbons and medals that were awarded to them for their commendable service. And they came forward and saluted Mandela and pledged their loyalty. I was not unmindful of the fact that not so many years before, they would not have saluted me but arrested me. Mandela was reminded of his past for a moment. He remembered that it was the same officials who were on the lookout for him and who used to arrest him and torture him like to the very extent a few years back. And now they are standing before him with due respect. Finally, a chevron of Impala jets left a smoke trail of the black, red, green, blue, and gold of the new African flag. So the air show came to an end with the chevron of Impala jets. Chevron refers to this is an Impala jet. This V shape is chevron. Chevron of Impala jets. Impala jets is the other one which I show you. And the air show consisted of the chevron of Impala jets that left a trail of smoke. Here we have some other colors, but at that time the trail of smoke had the colors of all the colors of African flag. So after this air show, the inaugural ceremony came to an end with the singing of the two national anthems of Africa. The day was symbolized for me by the playing of our two national anthems and the vision of the whites singing Kosikilele Africa and blacks singing Daistem, the old anthem of the Republic. Kosikilele Africa is an African hymn, and that was the anthem which was being sung earlier. And Daistem is the old anthem of the Republic. So on that particular day, the African song, this one, Kosikilele Africa, was sung by the English people, the whites, and the Daistem was sung by the Africans. And that way they displayed their solidarity for each other. Although that day neither group knew the lyrics of the anthem they once despised, they would soon know the words by heart. So each group despised, hated the other one's song. But this day, they both sang the songs together, by the Africans singing the English song and the English people singing the African song. And Mandela says that though they didn't know the lyrics of the anthem on that particular day, they will be soon learning it by heart. So with this, the first part of the lesson ends. That is a description of the inaugural day. Now let us go through these questions. Where did the ceremonies take place? Can you name any public buildings in India that are made of sandstone? Where did the ceremonies take place? It took place in the lovely sandstone amphitheater in the Union Buildings, and that is in the place Pretoria. And can you name any public buildings in India? Red Fort is one of them, and you can find the remaining ones. Then next question, can you say how 10 May is an autumn day in South Africa? 10th May is not May season is not autumn season in South Africa, but still he refers to as autumn. You know, in autumn season, leaves are shed, and as the spring approaches, the fresh leaves sprout out of the branches. So here in Africa, what is happening? The existing government was abolished, and it is giving way to a new form of government. So just like leaves are being shed, the existing government was removed, and the new, just as leaves sprout out of the branches, the new form of government is installed. So it can be considered as an autumn day. Now the third question. At the beginning of his speech, Mandela mentions an extraordinary human disaster. What does he mean by this? What does he refer to by this human disaster? Just as I've mentioned before, it refers to the apartheid system that existed in Africa. Now, what is a glorious human achievement he speaks of at the end? The apartheid system had been abolished from Africa, and the new system of government, which was fairly elected and which took care of the rights of the people, irrespective of their race. Such a government was installed in Africa. Now the fourth question, what does Mandela thank the international leaders for? He's been thankful to the international leaders for having come to Africa to take part in their victory, which can be termed as a common victory of justice, peace, and human dignity. What ideals does he set out for the future of South Africa? Initially, he pledged to uphold and obey the Constitution of Africa and to work for the welfare of the Republic and its people. Then he asked the entire people of Africa to work together so that they can liberate themselves from the bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, and all sorts of discrimination. So that's the end of part 1. So let us take a recap. So this is Nelson Mandela's autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. First, we saw that the inauguration ceremony took place on 10th May 1994, and it took place in the Sandstone Amphitheatre, which is in Pretoria. Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as the first deputy president, Mr. de Klerk, second deputy president, and Mandela pledged to uphold and obey the constitution and work for the welfare of its republic. Further, what did Mandela say in his address? Expressed his hope for a new society in Africa, thanks the international leaders, considered it as a rare privilege to house these international leaders, and pledged to liberate his people from the bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, and discrimination. And the last one, what are the events that we came across in the swearing-in ceremony? First, there was a spectacular display of all these aircrafts. Then, the highest generals of South African Defence Force and the police saluted Mandela and pledged their loyalty. Then, the air show was ended with the chevron of Impala jets trailing smoke in all colors of the African flag. And the last event was the singing of the new 2 national anthems. Now to the next part of the lesson. Okay. Now, where he pays tribute to the African patriots. On the day of the inauguration, I was overwhelmed with a sense of history. In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War, and before my own birth, the white-skinned peoples of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned people of their own land. So, on the inaugural day, Mandela was remembered about his past, and the thoughts regarding the past of Africa came flooding into his mind, and he just thought about the initial days when apartheid was first introduced to the land of Africa. It all started in the first decade of 20th century. It happened between the years 1901 and 1910. A few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War. Anglo-Boer War was a war fought between the English and the 2 Boer states. And it was over the authority of the empire in South Africa. So a few years after that war, and Mandela was not born at that time, what did the white-skinned people do? They patched up their differences. They had differences between them. They forgot their differences. They ignored the differences and raised a system, erected a system of racial domination. They considered themselves to be dominant race. And this structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, most inhumane societies the world has ever known. And this was the basis of the society which was known for his harshness and which was branded as the most inhumane society. Now, in the last decade of the 20th century, and my own 8th decade as a man, that system had been overturned forever and replaced by one that recognized the rights and freedom of all peoples, regardless of the color of their skin. So it began soon after in the first decade of the 19th century, and this system was abolished by the time it was the last decade of the 19th century. And the system had been overturned and it was replaced by a new form of government that recognized the rights and freedom of all the people of Africa, regardless of the color of their skin. That day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. So this day, the inaugural day, the rejoicing day, is a result of the unimaginable sacrifice of all the people that stood for the cause of apartheid. And it is a result of their sacrifice, and which can never be counted or repaid in any way. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. Mandela had felt this several times, not only on that particular day, that he was just a product of all these African patriots that had lived in his country. That long and noble line ended and now began again with me. I was pained that I was not able to thank them and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. So the line of noble men had ended, and another era has started with Mandela at its lead. And at this moment, Mandela feels sorry that he can't thank those people who is responsible for bringing down this moment of pride. And he feels sorry that none of these great men can see what their sacrifices had achieved. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. So the policy of apartheid had created a deep and lasting wound in the minds of every African people. All of us will spend years, if not generations, recovering from that profound hurt. So it would definitely take years to recover from the wound to heal. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect. The effect that was not intended, that was not expected. What is that? It produced the Oliver Tambo's, the Walter Sizzlus, the Chief Lutulis, the Yusuf Dadus, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobukwas of our time, men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity that their like may never be known again. So, the system of apartheid, the reign of apartheid, was of course an era of oppression and brutality. Oppression, torturing, brutality being so cruel. So, this was an era of oppression and brutality, and there was an unintended effect. What was that? Just because of this brutal treatment, just because of this oppression, it had created men of such characters like this Oliver Tambo. These are great African patriots who stood for the cause of apartheid. So, though it was an era of tyranny, it had produced leaders like these. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. And Mandela come to the conclusion telling that maybe people of such noble character can be created only if there is such intense oppression and brutality. My country is rich in the minerals and the gems that lie beneath its soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. Mandela, of course, admits that Africa is rich in minerals and gems, but he considers the greatest wealth of Africa, considers the African people to be the country's greatest wealth. He says that they are finer and truer than the purest diamonds. And now he talks about the lesson that he came to learn when he was associating with the noble persons just mentioned before. It is from these comrades, friends, from these people in the struggle that I learned the meaning of courage. It is from them that I learned the meaning of courage. Time and again, I have seen men and women risk and give their lives for an idea. Many times, often, I have seen men and women risking their lives, and some of them even gave up their lives. I have seen men stand up to attacks and torture without breaking, showing a strength and resilience that defies the imagination. He has also seen people standing up, that is, bearing the torture and withstanding the oppression and without giving up, and showing a strength and resilience. Resilience is able to withstand a suffering. And resilient, you can think about the rubber ball. If you press hard a rubber ball, it will yield to the pressure that you apply. But once you release it, release your hand, release the pressure, what happens? It regains its shape. So just like that, these people were like that. They were tortured to the very extent just to prevent them from revolting against this cause. But once they were released, they just joined the strike, and they continued the fight. The brave man is not before that, I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. So Mandela learned from them that you can't say that a person is brave just because he lacks fear. A person is brave only when he overcomes the fear. I learned that courage was not absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Now he talks about human goodness. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. You can think about a baby. When a baby is born, he doesn't have hatred towards anyone. He just smiles back at a person, whoever takes him in his arms and cradle him. So just like that, no one is born hating another person because of its color, of his skin, or his background, or his religion. Then people must learn to hate. So it is a developed feeling. It takes time for people to start hating a person. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to human heart than its opposite. So Mandela's concept is, if people can learn to hate, they can be taught to love also. And teaching them how to love is more easier than teaching them how to hate, because love comes to human heart more naturally. And he brings in an example from his own life. Even in the grimmest times in prison, when my friends, they were pushed to our limits. When my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second, but it was enough to reassure me and keep me going. So this is what Mandela says. When he and his friends were tortured to the very extent, he could see for one moment or two the guards being sympathetic to them, and maybe any human being would be reluctant to implement such wicked ideas. The guards are just obeying their superiors, but still they would be hesitant for a moment or two. And this was enough for Mandela to believe that goodness is still there in humanity, and that helped him to go on with his efforts to wipe out apartheid from his country. So from this instance, he comes to the conclusion that man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. So this man's goodness, in every man is a good man. There is goodness in every man. But only thing is that it is hidden by something or the other. And the goodness is innate in human beings. So with that, we come to the end of the second part 2. And let us go through the questions now. What do the military generals do? How has their attitude changed and why? What do the military generals do? They came forward, saluted Mandela, and pledged their loyalty towards him. And how has their attitude changed? How has their attitude changed? Just as Mandela puts it, a few years back, they were on the lookout to arrest Mandela. For them, as far as the police officials are concerned, Mandela was a criminal. But now their attitude had changed completely. They are standing before Mandela with due respect. And the reason is he has become Africa's first black president. Why were the 2 national anthems sung? As I told you, one was Kosiki Leli Africa is an African hymn, and that song was sung by the whites, and Daistem is an English song, and that was sung by the Africans. And these 2 songs were sung at that occasion just to express their solidarity for one another. The third question, how does Mandela describe the systems of government in his country in the first decade? In the first 10 years of the 19th century, what happened? The white-skinned people of Africa erected a system of racial domination. They considered themselves as a superior race and drafted a constitution that favored them and damning the blacks as someone who was not worthy at all. And what happened in the final decade? That system was eradicated. The system of apartheid was eradicated from Africa, and a new government was installed that took into consideration the rights of people irrespective of the race. What does courage mean to Mandela? Just as we read now, it refers to courage is not absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Which does he think is natural, to love or to hate? Which is natural? Of course, to love. So let us just go for a recap now. What we learned under section 2. Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom, Part 2. Mandela is overwhelmed by a sense of history, and he is reminded of the beginning and the end of apartheid in Africa. Then he remembers the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of his people. Felt that he is simply the sum of all the African patriots who had gone before him, and he feels pained that he is not able to thank them, nor they are able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. What is the unintended effect of apartheid? It created men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity Mandela considers the entire people of Africa to be the country's greatest wealth. And this is his own words, finer and truer than purest diamonds. He refers to the people of Africa. And his concept of courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. And his concept of human goodness. If men can learn to hate, they can be taught to love as well. For love comes more naturally to human heart. And he concludes by stating this: man's goodness is a flame that cannot be extinguished but can be hidden. Now I have a few more assignments to you. On page 24, under thinking about language, we have the noun-verb combinations. Let us read the instructions given there. There are nouns in the text, formation, government, which are formed from the corresponding verbs, form, govern, by suffixing at, ion, and or ment. So here you get the noun form and here the verb. So you can choose any verb forms or noun forms from the text and write it under the concerned column. But when you change the verb into its noun form and by adding a suffix, just take care of the spelling. For example, rebel is the verb and its noun form is rebellion. How did you get the noun form? By adding the suffix ion. But the L in rebel had been doubled. So take care of such changes. Just like that, you have constitute and constitution. Constitute, you have removed the I and added ion, the suffix. So find similar verb-noun combination and fill up the blanks. One more is there. This is a paragraph where you have certain blanks and you are asked to fill those blanks with the noun form of the verb given in brackets. Then using the definite article with names. You know that the definite article the is not normally used before proper nouns, nor do proper nouns usually occur in plural. We do not say the Nelson Mandela or Nelson Mandelas. But now look at this sentence from the text. The decades of oppression and brutality produced Oliver Tambo's, the Walter Sisulus of our times. Used in this way with the and or in the plural, a proper noun carries a special meaning. For example, what do you think the names above mean? Choose the right answer. Names above. Look at these names, the Oliver Tambos and the Walter Sisulus. Does it mean, for example, Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, or many other men like Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, many men of their type or kind whose names may not be as well known? Obviously, it refers to be. And so based on this, you get an exercise. You are asked to bring out the meaning intended by each sentence. So against each sentences, you can write the meaning. And that is the last assignment. So altogether, you have got 3 assignments. First is to find the meanings, to match the meanings with its expressions. Next is to fill up the boxes and the paragraph using noun-verb combinations. And the last one, the use of definite article with proper nouns. Okay. With that, we come to the end of the class. Be ready with this exercise when you come for the next class. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you.